Hello everyone and welcome back to the Green Man channel, and tonight I'm going to be attempting to rank Opeth's discography, their 13 studio albums, from my least favourite to my favourite, and I will make attempts at explaining why the albums are ranked the way I have, although this is a very subjective list, so yours may be entirely different, and it may be just because our tastes vary a little bit in the style of Opeth that we like, because Opeth have been around for such a long time. They've evolved over the 3 or so decades that they've been making music, and they have been very consistent as a band. And I think everybody can recognise that Michael Ackerfeld growl that he has. That is one of the most well known, I think, in metal and perhaps even in music as a whole. And the instrument, the musicians that have been involved in Opeth over the years have also been obviously fantastic as well. And one of my favourites, I think, will probably be Martin Lopez on the drums for Opeth. I think between about the sort of, I want to say 96, 97 to about 2006 ish. They're a band that have been so, as I say, so consistent. So I'm going to stop with the introduction. I'm going to get on with things very quickly. So starting with number 13. So this is my least favourite, and I'm going with Sorceress as my least favourite. Now, I think Sorceress is it's not a bad album, first of all, I don't think, but I feel like a lot of time is spent on this album where it doesn't feel like it's got all that much direction to it. It's at times sort of feels like there's a lot of doodling going on, without so much of, sort of song structure or lyrics. I know that's the case with Opeth with a lot of their stuff, but with Sorceress, I didn't really feel that the message got across to me very much with what this album was really going for. And I would say that this does have a song I really like on it called Will o' the Wisp, which was one of the singles off the album, I think. And I do really enjoy that song, and Sorceress is kind of cool as well. It's got a good groove to it. But most of this album it doesn't chime with me. Number 12, moving quickly on to number 12, is Heritage. Now, Heritage was the first album of their kind of more prog rock years in the 2010s, and I kind of liked it. After a while, it grew on me a little bit, otherwise, it may have been lower than Sorceress. But there's stuff like Devil's Orchard on here, and I feel like the album gets off to a pretty good start. But it kind of, for me, it doesn't keep up that level of spectacle that the start of the album had, that Opeth we know can do. And it's not that it's just because it was their change of prog rock that I've put this at 12. I just don't think it's quite as good an album as some of their other later prog rock albums in the 2010s, which I will come on to later. For that reason, Heritage is 12 on my list, and you may disagree, which is fine, but this is subjective and it's just my choices. Number 11 on my list is Orchid. Now, I think this one may be divisive a bit. It was their first album, their debut album. Now, for me, this is a real sort of a difficult one for me I found this difficult to place on my list, because there's moments in this album that I find fantastic. I mean, from the opening galloping riffs that you get in The Mist She Was Standing, I absolutely love those. The Twilight Is My Robe is my favourite track off this album, I would say, with just some amazing changes. And that, for me, that track is the first indication of what Opeth we are going to get in future years, and a sign of how good this band can be. But there's a lot of time on this album I didn't feel like where it was really very captivating. I mean, Opeth sometimes are all about atmosphere, and I know they have long passages of repeating the bars of guitar riffs with little subtle changes here and there, but in this album I didn't really sort of feel enough of those changes to really get me hooked onto it quite enough, except with The Twilight Is My Robe, perhaps. At number 10, I've chosen Watershed, another album which I kind of have slightly mixed feelings with. I like a couple of the tracks on it. I love Air Apparent, I like Hessian Peel, but kind of as a whole, again, I've never really been completely locked into Watershed, rather like with Orchid. It's slightly splits my feeling a bit. Again, it's a good album. I mean, this is a good album by undoubtedly, and it will be much higher up, I think, on other people's lists. But for me, Watershed has never really quite chimed enough. Number 9 on my list is Damnation, and a while back, I think this would have been quite a lot higher on my list. It has some beautiful, clean work on the acoustic guitars. Some of my favourite Opeth work, to be honest. It's quite a short album for Opeth. Obviously, it was following Deliverance, wasn't it? And I felt that, it could have been more for me. I think there could have been more of the kind of tracks you have, like Window Pane, In My Time of Need, a bit more like that. In fact, though, I think one of my all-time favourite Opeth tracks is on this album, and it's a track that for some reason I just find it's just amazing. There's something about it that lingers with me every time I've heard it, and that is the track called Hope Leaves, which is just wonderful. But the rest of, I'd say the other tracks, the other half of this album, I'm not really too bothered about. So because of that split, again, this is only at number 9 on my list, and I've had to make some tough choices here. Probably not an enviable task to try and rank such a magnificent band, because frankly, Opeth are magnificent. So not an easy one to do, but I thought it would be a cool challenge to do. At number 8, I've gone with Pale Communion. This is a very good prog rock album. Let's make no bones about that. This is a good, very solid prog rock album, actually, with more than a couple really good tracks, I'd say. And I think I would say on this album, my favourite is Faith in Others, which I think is a pretty gorgeous little track. And Cusp of Eternity is a really good one to sort of get you into the album. And I think this does better than Heritage in keeping you engaged, for my money anyway. I think it does slightly better than Heritage, and it's a pretty good prog rock album. So yeah, I do recommend, if you've not listened to Pale Communion because you don't like the diversion that Opeth took away from their more heavy stuff with the growling, I still think you might quite like Pale Communion, because it is just a very good prog rock album. Now, moving on, I'm losing count of where I've got to now. I've got to be careful. I have written this list down. So it is, I think we are on to number 7, which I have picked as Deliverance. So, this is a really, this is a cracking Opeth album. Let's make no bones about that. And Wreath, Deliverance, the first 2 tracks on this album are vintage Opeth for me, vintage heavy Opeth, and those long passages, but they're passages which are almost hypnotically good at times, particularly as you get towards the end of Deliverance. And I love the sort of subtle vocal touches towards the end of the Wreath track as well, where I think there was a little kind of clean vocal moments towards the end of that I really enjoy. But Deliverance as a full package, I mean, it for me, again, I think this album could have been even better. I think it could have been even better than it was. There are a couple of tracks that didn't chime with me as much, like Fair Judgment, I think. And the track at the end, sort of, I feel, I know Opeth tracks are meant to be long, but sometimes they don't keep me quite always with them all the way through. And I'd say maybe that last track is a little bit like that with me for Deliverance, but it may not be the case for you. At number 6 now, I am going with Encoder Venom, their very recent release. I say very recent, a couple of years back. And this one, what a gem this was. This is quite high up on my list, considering I would admit to being more of an earlier Opeth leaning person. In spite of that, this is a wonderful, beautiful full-length album by Opeth, with just some cracking moments on it, like with Lovelorn Crime's guitar solo, the sort of very sort of melancholic final track that sees out the album, I really enjoy as well. This is an album that shows that Opeth's changing direction was actually there, I think, to lead to something like this. And I don't have a big problem with their change in direction as such, particularly not when they put out an album like they did a couple of years ago that shows that this progressive rock side of Opeth can be just as strong as their progressive metal side. I would admit to missing his growls. I'm sorry about that. But I do miss Michael's growling. It's just such an awesome thing to be able to do. And I will admit that much, but I do think their latest album was excellent. And it's number 6. Number 5, now we get to the top 5. Now we get to the really serious stuff. This is where there will be a lot of, I expect, agreement or disagreement. A lot of people perhaps, I can see you over the other end of the screen going, what? That's far too high or whatever. But anyway, here we go. So number 5, Morning Rise. I have always liked Morning Rise, to be honest. I know that it maybe has its problems, perhaps with, a couple of incredibly long tracks like Black Rose Immortal, but Black Rose Immortal is still an awesome track. It just happens to be an epic 20 minutes long. But actually, I think it's the last track on the album. Not the last track is on the album, it's the last track on the album. I think something called Eternal Soul Torture. I think that's the name of the track. It's just not so much for me, that one. But, most of this album is just, I find it just, even though, you have these very long classic kind of Opeth style tracks, it's just got that mood about it, the atmosphere, combining well with, I think, some of Opeth's best changes. The Night and the Silent Water, I think, is just some of my favourite passages that Opeth have ever done are in that track. And if you watch the live performance of that as well, which I think was at the Roundhouse, if you type in Roundhouse tapes on YouTube and watch that performance, I just think that version of The Night and the Silent Water is just amazing. Watch it if you haven't watched that. So yeah, basically, big fan of Morning Rise right here. And I love Morning Rise. Enough said. Number 4. Now, I do think this is the most controversial placement, perhaps, on this list, because this would be a lot of people's number 1 choice. That's Blackwater Park. Now, I'm going to have to do some explaining, because I expect this one is the kind of positioning on a list when you're trying to rank such a great band's discography that would get the kind of thing you get people, going a bit crazy about it. Now, I think Blackwater Park is an amazing achievement and so well polished from start to finish. Stephen Wilson does some wonder work with production and everything. No qualms about that at all. And I think this album has, sort of, for me, 4 of 5 amazing, epic tracks, brilliantly orchestrated by Opeth and by Stephen Wilson. But it's not actually, for me, there's just something missing from it. Perhaps it's that slightly more raw sound that Opeth had in some of their other albums. And for me, there's just a tiny bit. I don't know if I'm alone in this, and I might be alone, but it's like there's a tiny spark missing from it for me. But don't get me wrong, I adore Bleak, I adore Blackwater Park, Laker Affinity, tracks like that are fantastic. Drapery Falls as well has some amazing change moments in that one. So yeah, Blackwater Park only at 4. I'm sorry, Blackwater Park fans. That's still pretty high up, Top 4. Number 3 on my list is Ghost of Perdition, and another album which would probably be a number 1 or number 2 choice on a lot of lists. I love Ghost of Perdition. Again, this is really tough putting these in any kind of order. And it has, again, an absolute sort of pretty full listing of amazing tracks. My favourite perhaps being the Reveries Harlequin Forest, or perhaps the opening track Ghost of Perdition, which is something of an epic and a song which I think I've seen more reactions on YouTube than I could definitely count on my fingers. Just a great album, and it's number 3. If I have to explain why it's not quite my top choice, I guess I don't think I can. I think ultimately the top 3 now just boil down to personal taste, and I cannot really justify it. I fail to justify why this one is slightly lower, except the next 2 I love so much. They were probably 2 of my earliest discoveries of Opeth, and that is why they are my top 2, because I really, 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 really love these 2 albums. And that is My Arms, Your Hearse at number 2. For me, pretty much every track on this album, even the short 1.5-minute track that they have on it called Magical, I love that as well. And this is like telling a great story from the start to finish. The riffing is just incredible. The clean passages mix so well with the harsher, more death metal-y passages. I feel like Opeth are on top form in this album. And Demon of the Fall is perhaps, one of my all-time favourite Opeth tracks. It would be in my top 5 Opeth tracks, I think, maybe even higher than that, which would be probably number 1, wouldn't it? And I love the song When as well. I think that's an amazing Opeth song. These are really exciting, spectacular Opeth songs, and My Arms, Your Hearse gets my pick for number 2, which means it leaves only one for the number 1 spot, and that is Still Life. And Still Life is, it's just a progressive metal classic, and it, in every way, for me, is perhaps, for me, an example of just genius. I think it's genius. It's genius pretty much from start to finish. I didn't feel there were any weak tracks on this album at all, or even not weak tracks, but just slightly less than gold standard Opeth tracks, if you like, if I prefer to put it like that, because I don't think Opeth really have many weak tracks at all, if any. So for that reason, and Still Life is top. And this has perhaps, I know I said Demon of the Fall might be my all-time favourite track, but actually I think my all-time favourite Opeth track is Godhead's Lament. That one is just special. It's just everything I would ever want in an Opeth song, done in a way which chimes with me like few other metal songs would, I suppose. It just has something that little bit extra to it, and a fantastic finish to it as well. That one is, if you know Opeth but you don't know Godhead's Lament, do yourself a favour and check that song out. I mean, maybe I'm raving about it too much for some people, but there is just something about that track. I don't know what it is, that of all the Opeth I've listened to over the years, Godhead's Lament stands out for me as their one track, which is the one to, the track to end all tracks, that one for me. Thanks very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Thanks for joining me again. Cheers. Take care.